I just wanted to quickly review some of the things that we talked about yesterday in class. I think some of you could benefit from hearing it just one more time, and those of you who are absent as well could just listen through it. We started class yesterday by talking about this relationship between problems that are written like division and problems that are written with multiplication. So we started just by simplifying these numbers and talked about 20 divided by 4 equals 5. 35 divided by 5 equals 7. Negative 12 divided by 3 is negative 4. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. And all of those, we used our calculators, we typed them in, got to our answers pretty quickly. Right next door, we see the problems written a little differently. But you see up here at the top, the problem that we solved 20 divided by 4 and got 5 is now written as 1/4 of 20. Remember, we can use the word of to talk about multiplication. So what is 1/4 of 20? Well, that's also 5. And here, number 2, what is 1/5 of 35? That's 7. What's 1/3 of negative 12? It's negative 4. And we made the realization that as we went down, we were getting the same answers. And so we came to the conclusion that any division problem of two numbers, 20 divided by 4, can be rewritten as a multiplication problem by taking the denominator, in this case it's 4, and writing it as the reciprocal, so 1/4, and multiplying it by the numerator. This was our introduction to help us when we got to equations or things with algebra and letters in it that involved division. So down below, we saw these that now took some of our numbers away and gave us just letters. So for example, we have x divided by 7. And if we knew what x was, we could just type it in our calculator, do the division. But the goal here was to make them look like up above, where we rewrote it as a multiplication problem. So dividing something, and I'm using the word something because we don't know what x is, dividing something by 7 is the same thing as taking 1/7 of that number. So we can rewrite it as 1/7 times x. Down in number 2, we have w divided by 3. So dividing something, our w, by 3 is the same thing as taking 1/3 of that same number. And we just continued that pattern. Down here in number 3, we had 8 in the bottom, so we can write that as 1/8 of negative b. And then the one tricky one was this. We have an expression up here on the top of the fraction. But if we follow the same pattern, if we're dividing an expression by 3, that's the same thing as taking 1/3 of that same expression. We started with these introductory pieces so that when we started putting an equal sign and making it an equation, we already had some strategies on how to rewrite this. So the second page in front of you is 5 equations that all have division of something in them, and the prompt or the instructions are to rewrite each of the following equations using fractions. So we're going to talk through that same piece, and really everything on this side of the equal sign is going to stay the same. We are just rewriting these equations into a format that we know because we've worked for a few weeks now on solving equations with multiplication. So, looking at number 1, we're taking something and dividing it by 5. Going back to the pattern we just found, dividing something by a number is the same as multiplying it by a fraction reciprocal. So x divided by 5 is the same thing as 1/5 times x. And now this is an equation that I know how to solve. We've worked with equations dealing with multiplication, and we undo that multiplication by division. So I can divide this side of the equation by 1/5 and get 1x and do the same thing over here. Number 2, something divided by 4 equals negative 5 is the same thing as 1/4 times y equaling negative 5. And again, now I know how to solve that by dividing by my number of y's. In number 3, we have x divided by 2, and then we just added something to the end. We've seen equations like this. That plus 7 is really going to stay the same. It's just a constant on that diagram. But x divided by 2 is the same thing as half of x. So now we have 1/2 x plus 7. And if I was going to solve this equation, I would pause with my x's and zero this constant out first before I can divide. So that we're just, again, rewriting these equations into a form we know. Number 4, we have it equally -1. That -4 is our constant this time, and v divided by 7 is the same thing as 1/7 v. We're taking 1/7 of v, which is the same thing as dividing it by 7, and then subtracting 4. So again, to solve this, I would pause here and undo that -4, zero out the -4 before dividing. Last but not least, we have equation number 5, which equals 2. I'm going to put that there. And this is one where we have an entire expression, w minus 8, up on top. And we're dividing that whole difference by 9. So we can rewrite that as 1/9 of w minus 8, which hopefully this format looks familiar. You can either distribute first or divide by your 1/9 first to get your final answer. So on the bottom of this page, it gives you some space to solve these equations. I just wanted to review kind of the why behind what we did yesterday and refresh some of your memories as to what's going on as we jump into today.